When developer Sloclap's first game Absolver was making the rounds, I was all kinds of hyped for it. The combat looked so complex and weighty, not to mention the Dark Souls high I was on around the time fed into that hype. But it was no less real, and then the game came out and I thought it was spectacular. The narrative was unimportant to say the least, the environments were nice but samey, the combat was by far the defining aspect of the experience, and for good reason too. The styles made for varied and exciting moment-to-moment decision making and brawls. Building your character's combos was incredibly engaging, and it was a very refreshing take on both a PvP and PvE fighting game. It had its issues though, like how to learn moves you had to essentially grind them out by letting enemies hit you with them or use your defensive abilities successfully against that move. It made progression halt a little bit when you came across a cool attack that you wanted to add to your catalog, but overall I think it was a great time, even better with friends. You can check out a review I did for it back in the day with the card up top. It's from season 1 and it's one of the only videos from back then I'm kinda okay recommending today. Anyway, after that, Sloclap kinda went into hiding. That is until I was watching the State of Play presentation on February 25th, 2021. After falling immediately in love with Kana, my eyebrow was raised by the way this Kung Fu game looked. This looks like something else I've seen before, but what, I thought. So I did a quick search and put 2 and 2 together. These are the Absolver people, and they're not focused on making a multiplayer experience that's fair and balanced and all that nonsense. I'm so ready to see how these guys are going to tackle a single player focused combat system with interactable level geometry and environments, because Absolver stayed away from the environmental hazards for the most part, probably for the sake of keeping every player on the same even playing field. I was so excited after this realization, and similarly to Kana, I was relieved when it was confirmed that it would also be coming to PC via the Epic Games Store. So now that the time is upon us, let's take a look at Sloclap's Sifu. Oh my god, so first things first, this game is tough. I did not expect Sifu to be one of the more challenging games I've experienced in a while. Building off of the framework left by Absolver, Sifu aims to push the envelope a bit further on all fronts. The combat is tighter, the narrative is less ambiguous, and the Souls-like elements are completely done away with in favor of far more original ideas. Shall we start from the top? The player character has access to a standard light attack string and a heavy attack string. Several things can be thrown in to alter the combo though. Changing the sequence in which they're thrown out, pausing after some buttons leads to new attacks, or adding directional inputs can also lead to moves with different effects. Some attacks can leave an enemy stunned, some can be good for crowd control, some can push enemies back, some can trip, etc. Pushed enemies can slam up against walls and other objects just waiting for a follow-up, and tripped enemies can be pummeled on the ground. Weapons are also at play: staffs, bats, blades, and thrown items like bricks and bottles. The first 3 are indispensable tools that add some oomph to your combos, with the latter type being more one-time uses that are more for catching enemies off guard and stunning them. All physical attacks wear down the enemy's structure meter. As you probably noticed by now, we're operating with a similar system to the posture meter that Sekiro introduced and everyone else has ran with. Of course, defensive maneuvers like parrying and counterattacking after a dodge will start to break down their structure too. And when it's broken, as you perform well in fights, the meter in the bottom left-hand corner will fill up, and if you have the moves unlocked and are in range, then you can interrupt whatever the enemy is doing and stun them with one of these attacks. Alright, that's the bare bones explanation of combat, but the most interesting new mechanic Sifu has to offer has got to be the age system. When killed, the player character's age will go up, and the death counter will rise by 1. It's not the end of the world, however. If you keep a level head and learn what you did wrong, after a few takedowns, the counter will start to tick back down to 0. But if you're careless and get killed multiple times in quick succession, the death counter will continue to inflate, and whatever number it shows when you die is how many years you age upon a single death. Starting at 20 years old, each decade of age loses you a portion of your maximum health, but your physical attacks also grow stronger. But if you die after reaching 70 years old, that's a game over, because whatever age you've hit at the end of this level, that's the age you enter the next level at, and so on and so forth for 5 stages of increasing difficulty. Not helping the matter, this game doesn't pull its punches. Combat is extremely complex. It does become easier after you've been playing for a while, but this game gives you lots of tools and expects you to put in the time and not just learn how to use them, but master them. After each death, you can spend experience points and unlock new moves that you'll have moving forward. But if you go back to previous levels, you obviously won't have it. But if you dump 5 times that XP into one move, you can learn it permanently and use it on revisits to previous levels. Button mashing might get you results for a short while, but sooner or later you're going to have to learn your defensive moves. Going from a multiplayer setting where the goal was to make a unique character using 3 distinct classes that could stand up to everyone else's unique character, I had a feeling that the bulk of work for Sifu's defensive abilities had already been done, and wouldn't you know, I was right. Of course there's some small mechanical tweaks to how things work, but the way avoiding and parrying feels here is almost ripped straight out of the Windfall and Forsaken classes respectively. This took me a while to get the hang of, going from my Absolver days as the Windfall class, but I'm also going to blame some of this on poor explanations from the game, because the avoid command will only get you out of the way of high attacks and low attacks. You can only duck and hop over. To dodge side to side, you have to use the dash button. This isn't the most difficult thing to learn, but I think the controller could have been mapped a bit better. For instance, blocking locks your character in place, and to avoid, you flick the stick up and down while blocking. I can't think of a good reason as to why avoiding to the left and right was made a separate command. Sprinting is activated after a dodge, but you can leave the sprint function on the right trigger. Having to use 2 separate buttons to do 2 variants of the same function can't help but cross some mental wires every now and again. And it doesn't help that the block is on L1 and the dash is on R2, so they don't feel like the same inputs on a tactile level. It's very minor stuff, but I couldn't help but feel that way on a few occasions. Thankfully, Sifu understands that the best offense is a good defense. There are several strategies to employ in large group fights to come out with as little damage as possible and set yourself up nicely for the next brawl. Finding the weakest link and exploiting them will always be a good investment. Enemies will fall if their health is depleted, but it's much more desirable to use those stylish finishers that become available after their structure has been knocked down. 1, because they look and sound cool, and 2, they restore a small amount of health each time. Carefully raising weaker enemies' structure meters to act as last-minute pick-me-ups can be essential to surviving encounters with several enemies. When you find yourself at a disadvantage, just slow down. Enemy attacks aren't loudly telegraphed like in the usual action game fashion. Instead, there are several types of enemy classes. Each one of these enemy types have predetermined combos. It's your job to recognize and learn the combos for each enemy type. Then, you'll be more educated on what moves they can pull on you and how to counter them. You guys know how much I love learning enemy movesets, so this was one of the most gratifying things in the game. Going into a level and barely scraping by at 70-something years old on my first run, just to go back in to workshop the level was just incredible. Optimizing the run to minimize the chances of dying before the boss was so much fun. After every single death you take, it really feels like you come back the next time with some new strategy to make the fight go your way. If I take this bat into the next area, I can use it to break both of these guys' structures at the same time. If I can sneakily fling this brick, then I can get some extra damage on this rough opponent. Oh yeah, I remember there was a knife back here from last time. That should come in handy. This is the kind of thing that really ties Sifu's systems together. The accumulation of knowledge that you get about weapon and item placements, winning strategies, movesets that you can predict now, it's all amazing, and I think that's this game's biggest strength. Not to mention the little dash of Metroid that was thrown into the mix here with the secret passages and shortcuts. Yeah, every level has shortcuts that can cut down on the amount of danger you face before getting to the boss on the next go around, or even hide secret goodies. And in the case of the museum level, after you make it through the first time, you find a key to an elevator in the first area of the level that takes you straight to the boss. The bosses are essentially just far more difficult enemies. That sounds stupid when I say it out loud, but it's true. All the tactics that you can employ on the common fodder work on them just the same, except they have way more health and their attacks are way more difficult to read. And man, I think the most hard to read boss in this game has got to be the museum's first phase. Her chain weapon had so many different ducks and hops and sidesteps to master, and the windups all looked the same. The second phase was one of the easier fights in the game to me. I could just embarrass her with how many of her attacks you're allowed to take advantage of, but not the first phase. And the opposite is true for the club's boss. Firstly, there are staffs on the wall to make the fight a bit more fair, and then, in his first phase, you can beat him without taking damage if you just slow down and dodge his overheads and punish correctly. But his second phase, he decided to become one of those tool-assisted Smash Brothers fights. He's canceling his combos into other combos, and then he's backing away after every one of them, even if I dodged it all. The first boss was pretty easy to take down after I learned to counter his sneak sneak attacks. The boss at the tower was still really tough even after I learned to keep her at a certain distance so she would use the same combo, and then I dodge it to get easy focus meter, and then I run up and interrupt her with a strong move. Then the last boss at the sanctuary was really tough at first. You can't use the focus meter on him at all, so I had to break his structure the old-fashioned way. It was tough, and I barely beat him on my first try, but after I learned all his quick jabs can be parried, he went down pretty easily. Again, it's that feeling of satisfaction you get after going back into a boss fight and coming back out much younger than you did the first time. But okay, what about the narrative? The game has a cool hook mechanically with the aging up as you die, so how is that tied into the story? Well, the game begins as the player guides a man named Yang and his squad of no-good rotten meanies as they ransack a dojo, eventually confronting his old teacher and killing him, then discovering his son and extending a similar courtesy. But you see, this pendant the child has makes them immortal as long as they have it in their possession, and for 8 years the boy trained and plotted a revenge quest to seek retribution on everyone who was there on the night that his Sifu was murdered. And from there, the boy travels to the 5 different locations with one of the no-good rotten meanies waiting for the boy at the very end. And after reaching Yang and giving him exactly what he gave Sifu, the game just kinda resets and throws you back to the level select. I know I usually don't go into the narrative a whole lot, but I don't like how unresolved the game feels after Yang is killed, and I was curious how everyone else felt too. It's referenced several times by all the henchmen, but the player character is going through some pretty malicious murders here, but the no-good rotten meanies have all seemingly retired from their lives of crime. Their own henchmen can be heard saying things like that in an effort to make the player character give up on this destructive path. And that could be read as the villains understand how talented the player character is and they just don't want to die, but some of their stages also tell these short stories, with one in particular being more relatable than it might seem at first, but after all it's said and done, there doesn't feel like there's any consequence to how much blood has been shed. It's very possible that I'm missing some sort of true ending because I haven't completed everything there is to do, or I didn't beat Yang while at a certain age, but if that's not the case, and I don't think it is, then I don't think the narrative payoff to this journey was handled very well at all. It did its job for sure, but I don't think people will be going back to this game for the story. They'll come back, undoubtedly, but because of everything else. The combat is so razor sharp and calculated, knocking you down to the ground so many times and then demanding you get back up to beat it, unlocking crucial new skills to make the fights easier for yourself, and I'm excited to go back through already and try new skills to see what kind of new strategies I've missed out on. Visually, I think the game looks very nice. Every area has a unique look to it that makes it distinct, but it never gets in the way of the action, and some of the set pieces were really amazing. The music was a little underwhelming. It was good background music for the fights, especially in places like the club, but nothing that I'd go out of my way to listen to solo. Sound design has got to be given praise though. You feel every small action in these takedown animations thanks to the small detailed sounds. There are small things to dislike, mainly the camera. Complaining about the camera in an action game is like being upset about big boobs in anime. If there is an action game, there will be problems with its camera. It's just especially annoying when stuck in these tiny arenas with enemies that have intricate movesets that you need to be able to see and watch what they do, but it's not the end of the world. It also won't be winning awards for its length anytime soon, only taking me around 5 or 6 hours to beat my first time through, and then being able to run through every level without shortcuts in just over an hour. But I still have intentions to go back through and try to get no death runs for each level, so there are reasons to keep going back time and time again, and the developers have already confirmed that they're working on post-launch content, likely including new bosses and levels to learn, so that's great. I sincerely recommend Sifu to all of my action game brothers and sisters who kinda like getting knocked down a peg, but only so you can come back twice as strong for the next round. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. You're so awesome for doing that, and I bet you're pretty cute too. I couldn't find a way to naturally add this to the script, but you guys know how Marvel is pushing for this game universe with Spider-Man, Guardians, and Wolverine? If they were ever going to make a Shang-Chi game, I think they would be insane to not put Sloclap on the job. Just a thought. But next on the docket is finally my review of Bright Memory Infinite, and then it will more than likely be time for the biggest game I'll probably tackle this year, Elden Ring. I wonder if it'll be more challenging than Sifu was. Probably. But you never know, they said they made it less frustrating, whatever that means. We'll find out soon enough. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching. So thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.